Time for a double dose of short horror fiction. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Readings in the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have a review of two different short story collections. Both of these were provided by their respective publishers in exchange for an honest review. I read a lot of short fiction, and often, I don't want to review every single short story in a collection. That's not kind of very interesting to me. So I don't often have a lot to say about a collection other than I like it or I don't like it or the general mood of it. So I thought I'd combine these two reviews into one video for you. The first one is called Zegaajimo, Indigenous Horror Fiction, and this is edited by Kateri, Akiwenzie-Damm, and Nathan Adler, and this was published 19th October of this year. And this is the second collection of Indigenous horror fiction that I read this year. Earlier this year, I read Never Whistle at Night, a collection of dark Indigenous fiction. And in that one, all of the authors were from Indigenous communities that are in the country now known as the USA. In this one, all of the authors come from the country known as Canada. So it is different geographical regions and different tribes that are represented in the authorship of these stories. And yet you can still see a strong connection between that collection and this collection. I thought this collection was great. It's really short. It's really tight. It's only 11 stories, which is not very much. But within those 11 stories, there is this eclectic mix. There's a really dark sentimentality. There's a lot of heart. There's a lot of passion, which I think is really important when you have a short story collection like this. I won't say any of the stories were especially scary. Maybe a moment here or there in a few of them, but they aren't terrifying. They don't kind of, they don't leave you with nightmares. What they do is they cause you to look over your shoulder all the time. They always created a sense of unease for me, which is what I really like. Within this collection, even though it is so short, there is a wide range of subgenres represented. You have some science fiction horror, you have some cosmic horror, you have folk horror, you have survival horror, and then you have what I think of as like mundane horror. So the horror of the everyday, which sometimes can be the most frightening or the most disturbing, at least, because it's so closely related to our own lives. Notably, there isn't any body horror and there isn't anything really splattery or gory or gruesome in this. There are some bloody sequences here and there, but nothing over the top. And yet there still is this strong, unsettling vibe the whole time. And what I think is the heart of this collection is it asks, what does it mean to be horrific? What is terrifying? And when you're looking at through the lens of Indigenous communities, what is terrifying is having not only your land, but your culture systematically stripped away from you. So there is this like understanding of the invader, of the colonizer, of the imperialist mindset as being what is the horror. That is the monster that you are fighting against. Now that doesn't exist like within every single story, but that is kind of an overarching theme, is that what is really horrific is what has been stolen from us. And I think that is a really ripe ground for exploring the darker side of humanity, which I think this collection does really well. Within this collection, you have some stories that are looking at Indigenous folklore, Indigenous mythology, or Indigenous belief systems, and others that just happen to have Indigenous characters. So there is a good mix, and it never feels like it is teaching you something. It never feels like it's beating you over the head, but it does give you a chance to open your mind a little bit and explore an understanding of the world around you that you may not have already, which I'm always really grateful for, especially when I can do it and have fun at the same time and have tingles up and down my spine the whole time. So of these 11 stories, I'll say the last 3 were my favorite, but none of them were bad. I wouldn't rate any of them below 3. I enjoyed all of them quite a lot. The second to last one, especially, I thought was really maybe the least related to traditional horror in many ways. The setup for the story is a very, very stereotypical horror story. A young couple buys a new house and they're warned, welcome to your new house. Here's this one thing you shouldn't do. And of course they do that thing. So the setup is like very stereotypical, but then the turn and what happens is like totally unexpected. And that one was maybe the most unsettling of the bunch. There are stories like that they take the idea of what is horrific and they force the audience, the reader, to really ask themselves, what is the horror here? What is scary to you? What is terrifying to you? Is it legend? Is it mythology? Is it folklore? Is it supernatural? Or is it your neighbor? So these are the kind of things this collection is playing with. Again, it's atmospheric, it is moody, it is dark. It's a really tight collection. It's only 11 stories, like I said. So I do highly recommend this. This is Zegaajimo, Indigenous Horror Fiction. So that is the first of the 2 short story collections I want to talk about today. The second one is a short story collection by Raglin. So it is one author as opposed to an anthology of different authors. And this is called Extinction Hymns. This was actually published in 2022, but I did just receive a copy to review. Now, I have read some short stories by Eric Raglin before. One of them I read in the Book of Queer Saints, which I think when I did my review of that, I highlighted one or two stories, and I think his story is one of the ones I highlighted. But regardless, I had read a story of his in there, and he edited another short story collection called Antifa Splatterpunk. And so, based on those things, my expectation going into this collection was that it was going to be a little bit over the top, a little bit excessive, and I was wildly surprised because it wasn't that at all. This was an incredibly subdued collection that had a very strong voice. It was very dark, and it was unflinching. It really grabs you by the throat in a subtle way, which is a weird thing to say because nothing about it, or not nothing, but for the most part, it isn't over the top. It is a collection of 18 stories. Some of them are actually really short. Some of them are your normal short story length, but some are quite short. And yet it doesn't matter the length of the story. He manages to always have a really clear sense of character and a place in every story. It's really astounding how well he can hone in on creating this mood, this atmosphere, and the character in very short words. And I think that the title of this collection, Extinction Hymns, is perfect because this is like an elegy. It is a song of loss and mourning. It is a warning. It is a lamentation. It is a forecast for the doom that is to come. I think it is a really, really wonderful collection in that way. It is vulnerable and intimate and raw. It is unapologetically queer. It doesn't hold back, and yet it doesn't need to rely on gore and blood and shock value in order to scare you, in order to make you feel something. There's maybe one story in this collection that has some sort of splattery type elements, but the rest of them are almost bloodless, or they're very, very minimalist. He covers a wide array of subgenres and of tones and of feelings in this collection. So it never feels like you're reading the same story over and over again, yet they do all fit together really well. What he is really successful in doing is not only crafting these stories that have such a strong atmosphere and sense of place and strong characters, like I mentioned, but he's really good at giving you that gut punch at the end, which is what you want from a good horror story. A short horror story is that there's a build-up, it gives you time, place, characters, sets the scene, and then rips the rug out from under you at the end. That's kind of what you want in a lot of horror stories, and he manages to do that while still giving chills and these vibes that are going to stick with you. It's not just like a jump scare. He gives you this overall setting and this experience that takes your breath away, but then lingers. There is actually a lot of religious horror in this collection, and about how others' beliefs can be the cause of violence to you. And so it's not like supernatural religious ideas, but more about how the belief of others can be enforced upon you against your will. And that belief system, that institution, that collection of ideas can be weaponized to cause harm. And that is the monster. The weaponization of belief is the monster in many ways. And that is always an interesting place to explore. I really enjoyed the way he dealt with that in a couple different stories. It wasn't all the same, but you saw these ideas of others' beliefs being weaponized in order to inflict violence, in order to commandeer some sort of superiority or some sort of control over others. And that is the site of the horror. That is the site of violence, of monstrosity. So in this collection, he does manage to walk the line of being very stereotypical horror stories and giving you the emotions that you want out of a horror story, yet still having, like I said, this very vulnerable quality to them, being very open, being like a raw wound in many ways. And I vibed with these a lot. I thought they were a lot of fun. And in truth, both of these collections I thought were great. I had a great time with both of them. In some ways, both of these collections are highlighting the contemplative aspects of horror and how, especially in short stories, you can get away with having these more contemplative, slower paced ideas that you're ruminating on, that sometimes when you're working in a longer form fiction can feel drawn out. They can feel like they cause the story to lag. They can feel like you don't have the excitement you want from a horror story. But in short fiction, you're given the space to be contemplative and to have your horror be reflections on smaller injustices, and how those small injustices can be the monster that terrorizes your life or your town or your family or your community in many ways. You could say these two collections complement each other. I think more that this is kind of a vibe where contemporary horror is going, especially in short fiction, is that it's recognizing that, I love splatter, right? I love gore, I love splatter, I love cheesy, over-the-top horror. I love body horror especially. And I don't think that that's going away anytime soon. But I think right now there is kind of a renaissance of horror fiction being more interior, being more contemplative, being more psychological. And there's always been psychological horror. It's not like this is reinventing the wheel, but I think there is a moment for it right now. And I think both of these collections kind of grab onto that zeitgeist in a really exciting way. So I highly recommend both of them. I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Have you had a chance to read either of these collections? Have you read anything from any of the authors involved? Let me know down in the comments. For now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.